My name is Seth Carver. I'm 31 years old, and I build furniture for a living. Not the kind you buy flat-packed from a store and spend a Sunday afternoon swearing at. Custom pieces. Tables with live edges still carrying the shape of the tree they came from. Bookshelves built to hold the weight of someone's entire life in paperback. I work out of a rented shop on the east side of Halifax, and most days I come home with sawdust in my hair and the smell of cedar baked so deep into my skin that no amount of soap gets rid of it. 2 years ago, I was supposed to move to Vancouver. Her name was Jess. We'd been together for 4 years, and she had a job offer she couldn't turn down, and she wanted me to pack up the shop, find a new space out west, start fresh. I spent 3 months believing I would. I looked at warehouse rentals online. I calculated what it would cost to ship my equipment. I told myself I was ready. Then one night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said quietly that she didn't actually want me to come. She just hadn't known how to say it yet. After that, I got careful in a different way. I kept my world deliberate. Work, the shop, my Saturday morning runs along the waterfront, the occasional dinner with my brother Patrick, who lived in Dartmouth, and never asked too many questions. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a building on South Street, old brick, 3rd floor, radiators that clanked all winter, and a view of the parking lot behind a Tim Hortons. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and mine felt steadier than ours had ever been by the end. Then Simone Audette moved into the empty room. She's 27. She does freelance graphic design from home and takes on the occasional contract for a small nonprofit that does environmental work in Cape Breton. She grew up in Moncton, moved to Halifax 2 years before I met her, and speaks with the faint residue of French that shows up sometimes in the way she arranges words. Not an accent exactly, just a particular gentleness in how sentences land. We were nothing alike. She kept her desk covered in printed mood boards and half-finished sketches and color swatches she hadn't used yet. She made tea and forgot about it until it was cold, then drank it anyway. She adopted a spider plant she named Bernard and talked to it the way some people talk to old friends. Once she left a sticky note on the bathroom mirror that said, "Be less mean to yourself today." That's the whole plan. I didn't know it was meant for her and not for me until I asked, she said. And I remember this exactly. Does it matter? It applies. We'd been living together for 7 months when the Thursday happened. I'd spent the day doing a delivery out past Sackville, a dining table for a family who kept changing the measurements. By the time I got back to the city, the traffic on the bridge had been brutal and my back was tight, and I wanted nothing but a shower and whatever was left in the fridge. The apartment was quiet when I walked in, just the low sound of music coming from Simone's room, something with a lot of guitar, nothing I recognized. I knocked, no answer. I knocked again, harder, still nothing. She'd mentioned earlier in the week that she had a video call that evening. I figured she had headphones in. I was tired and not thinking clearly, and I just needed to ask if she'd used the last of the rice because I was too hungry to improvise. I turned the handle and pushed the door open just far enough to lean in, and then I completely stopped functioning. Simone was standing in front of her closet mirror in a dark green dress, sleeveless, fitted at the waist, the back half unzipped. Her hair was pinned up, one hand held a small earring she hadn't put in yet. The bedside lamp threw warm light across her shoulders and the back of her neck, and I stood there with my hand on the doorframe doing a very convincing impression of a man who had forgotten how to speak. She turned around fast. The earring dropped onto the carpet. I pulled my head back out of the doorway immediately. "I'm sorry," I thought. "I knocked. I didn't hear you. I was going to ask about the rice. That's not relevant. I'm leaving. Seth." Her voice was calm, not angry. Just steady. I stared at the hallway wall. "Yeah." A pause. Then quieter. "You already saw, so just tell me." Another pause. "Is it too formal?" I turned back slowly. I only looked at her face. She was holding the top of the dress against her with one hand, the other arm crossed over her waist. She was trying to look unbothered, but her jaw was tight. She wasn't really asking about the dress. She was asking whether she looked like someone who was trying too hard to be something she wasn't sure she was allowed to be. I took a breath and answered honestly. "No, it's not too formal. It's the kind of dress that makes the room pay attention." The words were out before I'd assessed them. She looked at me through the mirror without moving. I kept going because apparently I'd given up on self-preservation, like, not because of how it looks, because of how you're standing in it. Simone went very still. Then she let out a single, shaky breath, and her eyes went bright, and she said, "You can't just say things like that." "I'm a carpenter," I said. "I'm used to things fitting better than expected." She laughed, small and unsteady. Then she leaned against the side of her dresser and looked at the floor for a moment. Saturday I have to go to my cousin Rachel's engagement dinner, she said. My family's flying in from Moncton. I waited. My mom invited Theodore. She said the name flat, like it cost her something. He and Rachel are still close, apparently. Mom thinks it'll be good for everyone to be adults about it. I knew the name only from what had bled through thin walls during late phone calls she thought I couldn't hear. Theodore, the one who never raised his voice, the one who had a gift for making Simone apologize for being upset about things he'd done. She thinks if we just have a conversation, Simone continued, everything will be fine. She doesn't understand that some conversations are not the problem. She shook her head. I don't want to walk in there alone. I understood before she finished. She tilted her head and made it sound like she was joking, mostly. So Seth Carver, the man who just walked in on me getting dressed, want to make it up to me by coming to an engagement dinner as my boyfriend? Fake, obviously. Temporary danger pay not included. I should have said no. She was my roommate. We shared a kitchen and a bathroom and a very specific understanding about which shelf in the fridge belonged to who. If this collapsed, there was no version of the apartment we could both keep living in comfortably. Opening that door tonight had already pushed something that I couldn't push back. Saying yes would make it infinitely more complicated. What do you need from me? I said. She blinked. You're saying yes? I'm asking what you actually need. Her voice went quieter. Just be there. Sit next to me. Don't let me feel like I'm disappearing in front of him. Okay, I said. I'll go. She exhaled like she'd been holding it since Monday. Then she glanced over her shoulder at the open zipper and said, with a straight face, and since this is technically your fault, can you zip me up? I stood there for a moment like someone had just handed me a live wire. She laughed immediately. I'm kidding. But she turned around anyway. I stepped forward. I took the zipper between my fingers and pulled it up slowly, paying very close attention to not touching her skin. The sound of it closing felt too loud for the room. When I let go, Simone looked at me in the mirror. No more performance, no more joke to hide behind. Just two people standing in a small room with the rain starting up outside and a silence between them that had weight. I stepped back. Neither of us moved toward the door. Outside, the rain picked up against the window. Inside, something had shifted in a way I couldn't name yet and wasn't ready to. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay on my side, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bad map of Nova Scotia, thinking about the way she'd laughed when she was nervous and the way her hands had been shaking slightly when she asked about the dress. I kept hearing her say, just, don't let me feel like I'm disappearing, and I kept wondering what kind of person I was for finding that sentence so easy to answer. By morning, the apartment smelled like coffee, and whatever she used on her hair, something faintly cedar-ish, which should have been my thing but wasn't. I found her in the kitchen, in an oversized sweater, hair still damp, pinning something to the fridge with a small magnet shaped like a lobster. A yellow sticky note. Across the top she'd written, Saturday's Survival Protocol. Below it, 5 bullet points in her handwriting which leaned slightly to the left. 1. Don't let Theodore find a reason to pull me aside alone. 2. Don't let Mom ask questions about how long we've been together. She'll pick it apart. 3. Keep details vague, not contradictory. 4. If I tap your arm twice, it means I need you to redirect the conversation. 5. If I go quiet for too long, say something that makes me laugh. I read it twice. You really wrote a protocol. She didn't turn around. I once made a color-coded spreadsheet for a camping trip. This is restrained for me. I poured coffee and leaned on the counter. Point 5 says I have to make you laugh on demand. You told me last week that a client's cabinet door was having an identity crisis. I think you're capable. That evening, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table with her notebook open between us. She'd changed into a different oversized sweater. Mine, I noticed, the gray one from a half marathon I ran 3 years ago, and she had a pencil behind her ear and the focused expression she usually reserved for deadlines. How long have we been together? She said, pen ready. I thought about it. Recently enough that it still feels new. Long enough that we don't have to perform it. She looked up. That's actually good. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm calibrating. She wrote something down. What do we say if my mom asks why she hasn't heard about you before? I didn't plan the answer. It just came out, because you wanted to know what this was before other people started deciding what it meant. The pen stopped moving. Simone stared at the notebook for a moment. Don't use that one, she said softly. Why not? She looked up. Because if you say that, she'll believe it. A pause. And I'm not sure I won't either. We didn't speak for a moment after that. I changed the subject. Tell me about. She set the pen down, Good at dinner parties, knows wine, knows hockey, knows exactly what to say to my mother to make her feel heard. To her, he's stable, mature, the kind of man who has a 5-year plan, and to you? Simone was quiet long enough that I thought she might let it go. Then she said, he had a way of making me feel like everything I felt was a slight overreaction. Like I was always a little too sensitive, a little too much. He never said it directly. He was much too careful for that. He just had this look. She paused. After a while, I started hearing his voice in my head even when he wasn't in the room, checking myself before I spoke, editing myself down to something he wouldn't need to smooth over. My hands tightened around the mug. Don't, she said. Don't what? Make that face. You look like a table clamp that's been over-tightened. I laughed in spite of myself. She smiled too, and just like that the air came back into the room. We talked until almost midnight. She told me more about Theodore, not just the bad parts but the confusing ones. The early months when she thought she'd found someone patient, how it had taken her nearly a year to understand that his patience was conditional on her behaving in a way that didn't inconvenience him. I told her about Jess, about how I'd spent months planning a life in Vancouver for someone who had already quietly made a different decision. How the hardest part wasn't the heartbreak, it was the recalibration, learning to trust your own read of things again. Simone didn't rush to comfort me. She didn't say I was better off. She just said, being wrong about someone you trusted doesn't mean your instincts are broken. It means someone worked very hard to get around them. I looked at her. You understand that too well. She gave me a tired, honest smile. Theodore didn't leave me. He just made me small enough that eventually I left myself. Saturday morning, I changed my shirt twice. Then, I found a navy blazer in the back of my closet I'd worn to my brother Patrick's convocation ceremony 3 years ago. It still fit. I stood in front of the mirror in it for longer than made sense, trying to figure out whether I looked like a real boyfriend or just a guy who'd been sent to quote a kitchen renovation. Simone knocked. Yeah, I said. Can I come in? I opened the door. She stood in the hall in the dark green dress. The same one, hair done properly now with a few pieces loose near her face, small gold earrings, a coat over her arm. She looked put together and slightly terrified and so carefully assembled that it made my chest hurt a little. She looked at me for a moment. Then she reached up and fixed my collar with both hands, straightening it without saying anything. You look like someone people will want to trust, she said finally. I looked down at her hands still resting on my lapels. Is that what we're going for? Tonight, yes. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I showed her the screens. It was from Rachel's fiancé, passing along information from Simone's mom, the restaurant address, a note about the dress code, and at the end, Theodore confirmed. Should be a lovely evening. Simone read it without expression. Then she handed the phone back. Let's just go, she said. I held out my hand. She looked at it for exactly 1 second, then took it. The terrifying thing was how natural it felt. The restaurant was in the Marriott on Lower Water Street, a private dining room with the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were being gently filtered. Round tables with white linen. A view of the harbor through tall windows. The sort of place that works hard to look effortless. Simone's grip on my hand tightened the moment we walked through the door. Her cousin Rachel spotted us from across the room. She was tall, easy in her happiness, already glowing with the particular energy of someone who has recently made a decision they're fully at peace with. The second she saw Simone, she crossed the room. She hugged her first. Then she pulled back and looked at me with frank curiosity. So you're the roommate, she said. Guilty, I said. She mentioned you exactly once, and it was about a shelf you built her. She looked at Simone. It was a good shelf. He has his moments, Simone said. Simone's father, Henri, found us next. He was a quiet man. Hands like someone who'd done physical work earlier in life. A firm handshake that lingered in the way that meant something. He held onto mine for an extra beat and gave me a small nod. Her mother, Claudette, was a different conversation. She came from the far side of the room in a cream blazer, hair perfectly done, smile perfectly measured. She kissed Simone on both cheeks and then looked at me with the expression of someone doing rapid arithmetic. Seth, she said. Simone never mentioned you. I kept my voice easy. We wanted to figure out what this was before we put words to it in front of everyone. Claudette raised an eyebrow. You've been living together 7 months. Some things are worth protecting while they're still new. A pause. Simone turned her head slightly and looked at me. I could feel her pulse at her wrist. Claudette said nothing for a moment. Then she gave a very small nod that could have meant approval or could have meant she was reserving judgment and moved on to greet someone else. For the next half hour, things were almost manageable. We talked to Rachel's fiancé, a genuinely warm guy named Paul who was a high school teacher in Antigonish and had opinions about the Scotiabank Center that I agreed with. Simone relaxed incrementally. We slipped into the rhythm of it. Then Theodore arrived. I didn't need an introduction. He walked in with the ease of someone who had never once doubted his welcome. Mid-30s, well-dressed in the deliberate way that says this is effortless even though it very clearly isn't, the kind of smile that arrives a half-second before the rest of his face. He made his way around the room slowly, hugged Claudette, shook Henri's hand, said something to Rachel that made her laugh. Then his eyes found Simone. He walked over with his hands loosely in his pockets. Simone. He said her name like he'd earned it. Theodore, she said, voice flat as a cutting board. His eyes moved to me, curious, assessing. And you are? Seth Carver, Simone's boyfriend. He tilted his head by 3 degrees. I thought you two were just roommates? We were, I said. That's how it started. He shook my hand with slightly more pressure than necessary. Then he looked at Simone with the kind of warmth that was designed to be seen by the people around them. You look wonderful. It's good to see you doing well. Thank you, she said. You seem settled. He said it gently. A compliment on the surface, just underneath it, something else. An implication that settled was unexpected, that she'd needed time to get there. Simone didn't respond. Theodore filled the silence easily. I've been doing a lot of hiking lately. There's something grounding about it. I think you'd appreciate that kind of thing now. A pause. You always needed more structure. I felt Simone go still beside me. I kept my voice completely level. That's an interesting thing to say to someone who runs her own business and has for 3 years. Theodore smiled at me. Smooth, practiced. Of course. I just meant that when we were together, she sometimes struggled with Theodore. Simone's voice was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that stops a room. He looked at her. She didn't look away. I spent 2 years trying to figure out what was wrong with me, she said. Her voice was steady and careful. I was late to things and you made me feel careless. I was emotional and you made me feel unstable. I tried to talk about problems and you made me feel like a problem. A pause. I know you think you were just being honest. I know you think that's what caring about someone looks like, but caring isn't correcting someone into a shape that's easier for you to manage. The table nearest us had gone quiet. Claudette was frozen near the window. Theodore's expression slipped, just briefly. You're making this into something it isn't. No, Simone said. I'm just saying it out loud. I've been saying it inside my own head for 2 years. It sounds about the same. She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were glassy but steady. Her chin was up. Seth isn't my fake boyfriend, she said, clearly enough that the people around us could hear. He's the first person I've lived with who never once made me feel like I was too much. She paused. I just thought you should know that, so you stop wondering what you were replaced with. The silence after that had texture. She turned back to me. Her voice dropped. Just for me. I don't want you to be a prop, she said. I want you to be here because you actually want to be. 2 years of Jess. 2 years of being careful. 2 years of small world, safe world, just mine and no one else's. All of it was right there, pressing at the back of my chest. But Simone was standing in front of me, shaking slightly with her chin up and asking me to make a choice in front of everyone. I took a step toward her. I've wanted to be here, I said, since before we left the apartment. She exhaled. Then she grabbed the front of my blazer and pulled me forward and kissed me in the middle of her cousin's engagement dinner, in front of her mother, in front of Theodore, in front of the harbor view and the white tablecloths, and Paul, the high school teacher who started quietly applauding. The kiss wasn't desperate. It was just true. Theodore left shortly after. No scene. He said goodbye to Rachel, shook Henri's hand, gave Claudette a brief hug, and walked out. The door closed behind him and the room exhaled. Simone stood in the middle of it all with her hands at her sides. Rachel pulled her into a long hug. Henri put a hand on her shoulder. Claudette stood by the window for a long moment. Then she walked over slowly, heels clicking against the hardwood, and she stood in front of her daughter. I didn't know it was like that, she said quietly. Simone's voice was careful. You saw what he wanted you to see. Claudette flinched like she'd been caught. I should have looked harder. Simone looked at her mother for a long time. Something complicated moved through her expression. Then she just nodded once and turned to me. Can we go home? The drive back to South Street was quiet. Simone sat with her coat over her shoulders and her hands in her lap and watched the lights on the McKay Bridge string themselves out over the water. I didn't try to fill the silence. When we got inside, she didn't go to her room. She stood in the middle of the living room with her arms crossed, not hugging herself, just holding herself together at the edges. Seth, yeah. Do you regret it? Which part? All of it. She didn't look at me. Getting pulled into my family situation. Standing there while I said things in front of everyone. Tonight. I thought about it for a real moment. Then I said, I spent 2 years building a life that was only big enough for me because I thought small was safe. You made the room a lot bigger. A pause. No, I don't regret it. She turned around. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked over and wrapped her arms around my waist and pressed her forehead against my shoulder. Not dramatically, just the way you lean against something solid when you're tired, and it's finally okay to stop standing up so straight. I don't want things to move fast because tonight was heavy, she said quietly. Then they won't. I also don't want to pretend tonight didn't happen. We don't have to pretend either way. She pulled back slightly and looked up at me. That's annoyingly reasonable. I work with joinery. I believe in things fitting at the right angle. She laughed. It came out a little watery. Will you just stay out here for a bit? You don't have to sleep on the couch. Just don't disappear into your room yet. So we sat on the couch with the lamp on low and the radiator clanking the way it always did after midnight. And we talked until nearly 2 a.m. Not about Theodore, not about Jess. Just about things. What she was working on. A table commission I had coming up for a family in Lunenburg. Whether Bernard the spider plant was getting enough light. Whether the Tim Hortons behind the building was haunted by the particular ghost of every breakfast she'd eaten sadly. At one point she fell asleep mid-sentence. I stayed where I was. Around 2:30 my phone lit up. Unknown number. She always needs to be rescued. Ask yourself why. A minute later, she never gets better. She just finds someone new to need. I stared at both messages for a long time. I looked at Simone asleep beside me. Mascara slightly smudged, green dress still on, one foot tucked under her. I turned the phone face down. Morning would be soon enough. She woke up first and found me in the kitchen attempting eggs. The smoke detector went off twice. She stood in the doorway in my gray half-off marathon sweater and yesterday's dress underneath it, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know you can just make toast, she said. I was being ambitious. She spotted my phone on the counter. I slid it toward her with it outstanding there. I waited for the panic, for the shutdown, for the apology for bringing all of this into my life. Instead, she set the phone down and said, "Can I have coffee first?" Not a question, just a statement of order of operations. I handed her a mug. She drank half of it. Then she said, "I'm going to block this number. Then I'm going to call Rachel and apologize for making a scene at her engagement dinner, and she's going to tell me not to apologize, and she'll be right, but I'll feel better for having done it." And then, she stopped. "Then I'm calling my mom." I raised an eyebrow. Not to fight, just to talk. Properly. She looked down at the mug. She didn't know what she was doing. I don't think she did. But she needs to hear that it hurt anyway. The eggs were overcooked. She ate them without complaint. At one point she looked at the plate and said, "These have a very interesting texture. They're rustic. They're aggressive." But she kept eating. We talked for a long time over the table. At one point she said, carefully, "I don't want you to be the reason I feel safe, Seth. I want to feel safe on my own, and then choose to be with you on top of that." Does that make sense? It made more sense than almost anything anyone had ever said to me. Jess wasn't a replacement for whoever came before her, I said. I don't want you to be a replacement for Jess. I want to be with you specifically. Theodore has nothing to do with it. Simone looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "Okay," she said. "Then let's go slowly and on purpose. That works." She smiled. "Do you want to take me on an actual date? Somewhere that isn't a family event with emotional landmines?" I was going to suggest it. Good, somewhere I don't have to perform. That evening, we went to a small restaurant on Barrington Street. The kind of place with maybe 12 tables and a chalk menu and no reason to be impressive because the food didn't need to try that hard. Nobody knew us. Nobody had any expectations. Simone wore the green dress again, and this time she walked into the room like it belonged to her. She told me about a design project she was trying to pitch to a client who kept requesting changes that made the work worse. I told her about a commission I'd turned down last month because the client wanted me to make something that looked handmade rather than something that actually was. She laughed so hard she had to put down her fork. After dinner, we walked along the waterfront. October in Halifax. Cold enough that our breath showed. She reached for my hand without looking at me, without announcing it, just took it like it was a decision she'd already made somewhere quietly. Outside a bookshop on Granville that had already closed for the night, she stopped and looked at me. "You can kiss me now," she said. "No audience. No reason, except that I want you to." Terms accepted, I said. She laughed. I kissed her. Rain just starting, the smell of the sea and old paper through the bookshop door. The particular quiet of a city after 10 on a weeknight when the people who are still out are only the ones who have somewhere real to be. The weeks after that were not seamless. Monday morning we both walked into the kitchen at the same time. Both stopped. Both looked at each other like we'd forgotten how to be casual. She was holding the kettle. I was holding my travel mug. We stood there for a full 4 seconds. Good morning, she said finally. Good morning, I said. This is slightly awkward. Very slightly. I blame you. I think it was the door. We made new agreements. Quieter ones. If something was bothering either of us, we said it before it became furniture. If one of us needed a day to decompress, we said I need a quiet day instead of just disappearing into a closed door. No using shared expenses as emotional leverage during disagreements. No pretending things were fine when they demonstrably weren't. There were days when Theodore's shadow still reached her. A message from an old mutual friend that mentioned him. A thoughtless comment from her mother in a phone call that made her go quiet for an hour. But instead of apologizing for being affected, she started saying it. I'm having a hard day, and I don't totally know why. Or, I need you to just sit here with me. You don't have to say anything useful. I was learning things too. One weekend, she mentioned offhand that Rachel and Paul were talking about a spring wedding, and I went so quiet that she noticed immediately. You're thinking about Jess, she said. Yeah, about the Vancouver thing? About being wrong, I said, about being the only one who was still building. She reached over and put her hand against the side of my face, just held it there. You weren't wrong about her, she said. You were right about what you wanted. Those are different things. I looked at her. And for what it's worth, she said, I'm not making a different decision quietly somewhere that you don't know about. That mattered more than I could explain. Spring came. Rachel and Paul got married at a vineyard outside Wolfville on a Saturday in June that behaved like the kind of day June is always promising but rarely delivers. Simone sang during the ceremony. Something original, quiet, built low and sure. Before she started, she looked down into the rows of chairs and found me in the third row. She pressed 2 fingers briefly over her collarbone. I nodded once. Her voice caught on the first line, then settled, then opened. Claudette sat in the front row and cried, which I didn't expect. Afterward, she walked over to Simone on the lawn, with a glass of white wine in her hand and an expression I hadn't seen on her before. I want to say something, she said. Simone waited. I think I spent a long time deciding that Theodore was good for you because he was good at being impressive in front of me, and I didn't ask what he was like when no one was watching. Her voice was careful. I'm sorry I didn't ask. Simone was quiet for a moment. I know you didn't mean to, she said. I also need you to know it still hurt. I know. Claudette looked at her. I'm listening now. Simone nodded. Then she reached out and took her mother's hand. Not a hug, not forgiveness wrapped up and handed over. Just a hand, just a beginning. Theodore, as it turned out, simply stopped. Not because of some final confrontation, but because Simone stopped leaving doors open. She blocked his number after that first night. She saved the messages for her own records. She told Rachel quietly what she needed, and Rachel didn't push back. Over time, the space he'd taken up in her internal monologue just got smaller, the way things do when you stop feeding them. 6 months after the engagement dinner, our apartment looked like it had been lived in by 2 people who had stopped keeping score of what belonged to whom. Her mug was always on my side of the dish rack. My good flannel had migrated into her half of the closet. Bernard the spider plant had been joined by 2 others which she named Gerald and Sue, and somehow all 3 were thriving because I'd started watering them when she forgot, which was most of the time. She left a sticky note on my workshop plans one evening that said, "Fair warning, this level of competence is doing things to my feelings." I kept it. One rainy evening in November, I came home to find her standing in the living room holding the green dress, the one from that first Thursday, just holding it by the hanger. "What are you doing?" I said. "Deciding what this is now." "What do you mean?" She looked at me. "I don't want it to only be the dress I wore to survive something. I want it to be the dress I wore when something actually started." I didn't say anything. She hung it in the hallway closet, the shared one, between my good jacket and her winter coat. That small thing hit me harder than I expected. It was a Sunday in December when I was repairing a loose hinge on the bathroom cabinet, which had been bothering me for months, that I said it. "You was sitting on the floor of the hallway reading something on her laptop, supposedly keeping me company, actually mostly reading. "Move your stuff into my room," I said. She looked up. "You could keep the other room for your work, set it up properly." But stop pretending we don't both end up in the same room by the end of the night. She stared at me. That's the least romantic version of that conversation I've ever heard. I build things for a living. I'm better with structure than delivery. She closed the laptop. Seth Carver. She said my name slowly, like she was measuring it. Are you asking me to share a room with you on purpose instead of by accident? I am. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. Yes, she said. We ordered pizza that night and sat on the floor of the hallway surrounded by storage bins, drawing out a plan for how the rooms would work. Her room becoming her studio, drafting table, her monitor, good north light for color work. My room becoming ours, nothing dramatic, just ours. We made a small sign for each door out of scrap wood from my shop. Her studio had a neatly routed label. Ours just said home, which she'd asked for, and which I'd made in maybe 20 minutes, but which came out right on the first try. She held it and looked at it for a moment. You're good at this, she said. Making signs, making things that mean something. I looked at her sitting there on the floor in the lamplight, pizza box open beside her, pencil still behind her ear, sawdust on her sleeve from having wandered through the shop that afternoon. For the first time since Jess, the future didn't feel like a room that could be emptied without warning. It felt like this apartment, old building, radiators that argued all winter, the Tim Hortons below us haunted by nothing except mediocre breakfast sandwiches. Two people who had learned to say the hard things before they became the only things. A spider plant that was never supposed to survive and somehow kept putting out new leaves. Sticky notes on every surface because some people need to write things down to believe they're real. And a green dress hanging in a shared closet between a good jacket and a winter coat because some things don't have to be only what they started as. Sometimes something real begins with an open door, a green dress, and a question that was never really about the dress at all. And somehow, without planning it, I ended up right where I was supposed to be.